Hi, I'm Joe Scacciaferro, and this is On Location. All right, here we go. And I laugh every time I say this, but my next guest has been a friend of mine forever, but his accomplishments are ridiculous. Because when I start reading these things off, you're going to think I'm talking about 3 or 4 or 5 different people, because he's just all over the place. And you know what? I'm actually going to read them, because there's no way I could do all this. So let's start with, he's a music director, he's a keyboardist, he's a synthesizer programmer, he's a producer, he's a composer, he's an orchestrator, and he's a touring professional. Cool, right? Okay, those are a lot of traits. But he did it with Rainbow. He did Little Steven, Cindi Lauper. I think that's where I first met him. Robert Palmer, Steve Vai, Red Dawn, Happy the Man, and so many more. And since 1993, he's been playing keyboards and is the current music director for the Billy Joel Band. He also served as one of the 2 associate music supervisors for all 4 productions of the Tony Award-winning Broadway show Moving Out. On Moving Out, he scored and arranged keyboard parts, programmed the synthesizers, and produced the classical playback tracks. And like I said, that's just all I could fit on this list. Dave Rosenthal, what's up, buddy?
How you doing, Joe? So good to see you.
Cool.
Yeah, I was listening to. I think we met earlier than Cyndi Lauper, actually. I think we met in Rainbow days, and because you modified some synthesizers for me way back in the beginning. It was definitely before Synth, and that's how we met. Was I through Triple S, your company that repaired things, and I had things that needed to be repaired, and we met at some point, and and I said, I have this synth, and I always wished it's really great synth, but I always wish it could do this, and you were like, I can modify it to do that, and I was like, really? Yeah, so I believe that was as far back as 83, maybe 82, somewhere in there.
Wow.
Yeah. So we go way back.
So for those of you who don't know Steve DeFuria, go look at one. Steve's got a couple of on locations with us. You and Steve are probably the 2 inspirations that challenged me to do that, to not just service, but to really figure out how to do tricky things on a technology that was brand new at the time. So right. You and Steve used to come up to me and go, can you make it do this, this, and that? And I'd go, I have no idea why, but yeah, let me try. And then it was cool. And I've watched your career, been part of you going all the way through, and it's been cool. Also, another one of the on locations, as I continue to promote Faro City, Mike Colvana. Mike's been with you forever, right?
Yeah, Mike. He's been with me about maybe I think 8, 9 years now, something like that. Yeah,
that's a long time.
Yeah, he's a great keyboard tech and a great guy, and what a history. And I know that you interviewed him recently, and I watched his interview. It was really cool. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, it's so funny. All these people that I've known for a long time, I don't know much about them in detail. I just know they're great people. And then all of a sudden I'm like, wow, there's like some heavy accomplishments here. I know all your accomplishments. So let's get to this. So I break you down into 2 worlds. You're a crazily accomplished monster musician, and you're also very technical, even though you'll modestly say, no, you're not. Yes, you are. So I'm going to split this interview in 2 ways if we can keep it. Let's talk about your music path. So that's always been your drive? That's a question.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm a musician through and through. It's not. I often say I didn't choose music; music chose me. And this is what I am. It's who I am. Fortunately, it's worked out okay. But this is what I do. It's the essence of my being, and it goes all the way back to when I started playing piano when I was 7, and learned and everything, and I just grew and grew and grew as a musician. And the technology side of things, I got introduced to it. Well, I'm jumping around here already, but I'm trying to. Was when I first heard a Tomita record in Pictures at an Exhibition, which was a classical piece all done on synthesizers, one note at a
Right.
time, in the early 70s, and it just blew my mind. And I was like, I have to learn how to do this. But this, it was because of the combination of the technology and music. Always, it's always, I kept on learning more and more and more about technology so that I can do cool things with music. So that they are very much intertwined.
That's crazy. So you said something, and all of us do it. Oh yeah, and then I did this, and then I just kept going, and that's not an easy thing, to keep evolving your career and to keep finding opportunities. What would you say you think is the key to keeping your career on the rise?
Well, when I was young, I really built a very versatile toolbox and developed my skill set in so many different areas, not thinking that why I was doing it. I was just interested in all these things, and I just wanted to learn everything there was to know about it. So, from audio recording, I wanted to know exactly what it took to be an engineer. Not that I planned on doing that with my career, but I wanted to learn what an engineer does so that I can speak to engineers in the future and get sounds that I wanted to be able to get, that I heard in my head, and I need to be able to speak their language to be able. So someday when I go in the studio, I would be able to know what to ask for, to explain to this person in his language or her language what I wanted. So that was a driving force. And the same thing with synthesis. I had these things in my head. I would hear things in my head. I wanted to learn, how do I get this, and how do other synthesizer players and keyboard players, how are they getting these sounds that I love to hear on records? I love this sound. This is so cool. How do you do that? I want to learn how to do this. So I studied that, and became the beginning of building this toolbox, even though I wasn't thinking of it that way at that time. But really, I was just fascinated by this stuff, and I had to learn how to do it because it was all connected to music that I wanted to make.
How did you chase the knowledge part, learning those skills? You're on the early edge of synths. You're on the early edge of electronic music. So as far as a keyboard player, they've been around a long time.
Right.
So that music is established, and there's established learning methods. How did you then move that over to find this next niche?
Well, again, I was just fascinated by it. I got a synth after I heard Tomita's Pictures at an Exhibition. I was so inspired that I wanted to get a synthesizer, and I wanted to learn how to do this. And but I didn't have any money, and my parents refused to buy one for me because they thought it would be a toy. And so they said, if you want a synthesizer, you got to buy it yourself. So I went out and cut lawns for 2 summers to put enough money together, and I finally bought a Roland SH-1000, a little monophonic synth. And I just sat there playing with it, and I learned how to use the basic things, but I didn't really understand what everything did. Although I knew twisting this knob did this and twisting that knob did that, and I started to understand, and I paid attention to what they were called and stuff, and I started to learn about the basics of synthesis. But it wasn't until I went to Berklee that I actually studied synthesis, and I studied audio recording as well as studying piano performance and orchestration. And I just, because all these things, I really just did a deep dive into all of them and treated each one of those subjects as though it were my major. And because I just wanted to learn everything there is to know about it. And the common denominator between synthesis and audio recording is that it's all signal flow based. And once you understand signal flow, it applies to everything, including everything that we do today, even a plugin or MainStage or Pro Tools or whatever software apps you're using nowadays. It's all under the hood. It's all about signal flow. And I was fortunate to learn that, at a very early stage in my career with my patch cable synthesizers and all that stuff, where if you didn't understand the signal flow, you got nothing. So, it all culminated later, but and turned into this really huge skill set and toolbox that I have to be able to do all these things, which I'm very fortunate I did. But really, it was just born out of me being fascinated by all these different areas of music and technology.
You hit on so many cool points. Right off the bat, you started touching things. You just started pushing buttons. You didn't wait to have this great knowledge. You didn't go through. You started seeing, okay, this does that. That feedback part. I'll do this and I get this. I do this and I get that. In the guitar world, it's play by ear, actually, I guess in just about anything. But it's the same. You can learn technology that way, which is what you did. And then you were smart enough to go back and figure out what that is. I tell you a funny story. I was working in the back of this small music shop, which is where I met DeFuria. And I was a bass player. I knew nothing about technology, even though they hired me to fix amps. I honestly had no idea what I was doing. So when the synths showed up, and I'm supposed to be the technical guy, and I'm holding, it was a ARP 2600, and I'm looking at it going, I don't hear anything. Then I just did what all audio engineers do. I just pushed all the faders up. Every knob went up. I still don't hear anything. What the hell is this thing? I don't get it. And then, thankfully DeFuria was there. Steve came down and went, no, dope. You got to have signal flow. And that has never left my head. Signal flow. And those synths, the old patch ones, gave you that visual of take this and plug it in here. Take this and plug it in here. There was literally a flow chart across the panels.
Right. Yeah. That if you didn't understand it, you got no sound. It's not like now modern synths where you just turn it on and you got a bunch of presets to select. If you didn't know how to do that, you couldn't use it at all. So you had to learn. Which was fantastic. It's great that you mentioned Steve DeFuria because he was one of my teachers at Berklee, and I believe he was one of the. We didn't know it at the time, but as a good friend, a mutual friend of both of us, all the way back to them. But he and I became friends later. But I met him initially because he was my synth teacher at Berklee in my first semester of synthesis, where the synth was an ARP Odyssey. You moved on later to an ARP 2600, but the first semester was an ARP Odyssey, and one of the coolest things that he did in that class, because we had to learn basic signal flow, but he had a synth up in the front of the class that we couldn't see the control panel. And then he would play a sound and we had to block diagram it, sitting in the seats by only listening to the sound to block. Okay, it's an oscillator. It's a sawtooth wave. It goes through a filter that's probably open about this much with a little bit of resonance. Then it goes through the envelope, and this is it. And we had to sit there and learn that. This was the most invaluable thing. One of the most invaluable things I've ever learned because it enabled me to now, hear any synth sound on the radio or any synth sound that I have in my head, and I know how to get it. Because and that was just such an amazing learning experience. It stayed with me, and I use it to this day. I don't sit and block diagram it, but when I hear a sound that I want to go after, either in my head or a sound on the radio or a sound on somebody's record that I have to copy for a gig, that's the process that goes on in my brain, and that's how I go after copying it.
That's such a DeFuria move. That's brilliant. That's a great way. It is. That's ear training.
Ear
at
training
that level.
Combined.
That's so cool. So let's talk about some of these gigs. When you jumped from, you're doing film now. You're doing all of the work with Billy. You are first call for just about everything. You are that level of musician now. There's a handful of you in the industry, but you weren't always that. So let's talk about you're doing your first, was Rainbow? Let's go past the high school gigs. Let's get it. How did you land Rainbow?
So Rainbow was my first big gig, immediately out of Berklee. It was funny. I didn't know it at the time, but it was the beginning of networking for my career. And, a friend of mine knew a friend of Richie's, Richie Blackmore. And that's how I found out that he was looking for a new keyboardist. So, I sent him, I did a little bit of homework, and I knew that Richie Blackmore loved classical music. So I sent him a tape recording of my senior recital at Berklee, playing all this like wacky, Liszt and crazy piano stuff that I had done back then. And on one side of the tape, I'm showing my age, it was a cassette tape. And on the other side of the tape was I put my band, my cover band that I was playing at the time, and we did like things like Kansas and some hard stuff and whatever was popular at that time, because we used to go out and play gigs. And that's what I sent to Richie Blackmore, and he listened to it and invited me to audition. But it was a cattle call audition. I had to go down to Long Island. I was living in Boston still at the time, and I went down there and I brought my gear with me, but I didn't have very much. I didn't have any money. I was a broke musician. I had a Farfisa organ, and I had a Fender Rhodes, and I had this Roland SH-1000 that I believe actually you modified for me, because I wanted that didn't have a way to do pitch bending on it like the Mini Moog did. So I took a pitch ribbon from a Micro Moog, which I figured out would fit there. And I'm pretty sure you were the one who modified that to make it work so that I had a pitch ribbon on my SH-1000 all the way back then. So that was actually, pre-Rainbow days. But anyway, so I went down to audition for Ritchie, and I get down there, and it's cattle call. There's all these keyboard players around, and I had my stuff with me. And they said to me, we don't want you to use your stuff. There's a keyboard setup up there, play this stuff. It was a Hammond B3. It was a Mini Moog. It was a clavinet. And it was, a bunch of like a little setup. And that's what they wanted me to play. Now, I've never played any of these keyboards before. I read about them. I knew how they worked, but I never played them. But of course I said, sure, no problem. And
of course you do.
And so I went up there, and it was now I'm 20 years old at this time, by the way. So I went up there, and the audition went well. We jammed a bit. We played a couple of songs that they had asked me to learn. I don't remember what they were, but, and we just jammed a bit. And then Richie would play me some stuff, and I would play it back to him. And he liked that, because I would pick up on stuff right away. And then it was okay, cool. So then that night I get a call, and they say, it's down to you and one other guy. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a 3-hour session with each of you tomorrow. And, the other guy is going to go in the afternoon, and then you'll go in the evening, and then we'll make our decision from there. So I said, okay, this is cool. So I get up the next morning, and I figure, okay, I got all day. How am I going to beat this other guy out? What can I do here? So I called every Sam Ash until I found one that had a Mini Moog on the floor. And I went there, and I said, listen, I'm doing this audition, and I got to learn how to use the synth like right now. And the guy said, knock yourself out. Here's a set of headphones. Go sit. And I sat there and I played with it. Now, I had already learned synthesis, and I knew how this thing worked, but I just didn't have the hands on yet. But I sat there for a few hours with headphones, dialed up a bunch of sounds. And when I went back that night to do my callback, I was setting up sounds on the Mini Moog, and I was getting around it, and I had it was a marked improvement on what I was getting out of the keyboards from just the day before. And so that helped a lot. And then the other thing that got me the gig, I found this out a year later. At one point, Roger Glover, who was the bass player in Rainbow, and he was in Deep Purple as well, came up to me and he said, okay, let's imagine right now we're on stage in front of 20,000 people, and Richie just broke a string, and there's nothing happening on stage, so you have to fill space, go. And I went, okay. And so I just played something on the organ, and then I played a few riffs on the synth, and then I went over to the clav, and I played something sort of funky on that. I don't know what the heck I played. I just played something. And it didn't matter what I played. I found out later. What mattered to them was that I wouldn't crack under pressure. And they said I was the only guy that they asked that of that actually played something. Everybody else had a story. They would be like, oh, don't worry, I'll be prepared for that, or I'm cool with that. I'll work something up and I'll be ready to go. Everybody had a story, but I didn't even think about it at the time. He asked me to play, so I played, and it was, that's really all it was. But those few things, I think, combined with the fact that I obviously played well, I got the gig.
Oh man, that's such a great story. How come I never knew this? This is a great story. I love, because that's part of my whole DNA is, I can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sure. And then in my brain, I'm going, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? How am I going to? But your face doesn't show that.
That's right. But but
let me ask you, were you nervous during the cattle call at the audition? Is there a sense of nerves that you have to just bury?
I'm very comfortable playing my instrument. I've been playing music almost as long as I've been speaking English. So it's like, it's just very comfortable for me. But I really did my homework, and I was prepared, or dare I say, as I tend to do, over prepared. So I had the benefit when I found out about the audition. Rainbow had already had like 5 or 6 albums out with 4 different keyboard players, or 3, whatever. And so I thought, I'm going to listen to all these, and whatever these keyboard players have in common stylistically is obviously what Richie Blackmore likes in a keyboard player. So then I started to get into what he was doing. I knew he liked classical. So I really did my homework, and I came into the audition prepared. Now, knowing that, of course, I thought in my mind, this is really a long shot. I'm going to try to get this gig, but I know it's a long shot because it's just, but I'm going to go it. But if I don't get the gig, I'm thinking in my head, at least I know I did my best. And that's all you can do in any audition situation is go in prepared and do your homework. And then if you don't get the gig, maybe you're just not the right match for that situation.
Right.
And you can't like let that bring you down or set you back. You just move on to the next thing if something like that were to happen. So I kind of went into it with that attitude, and that's the attitude I go into every one of my auditions with. And fortunately, I've never not gotten an audition, so you have to actually deal with that. but nonetheless, the attitude that you go into an audition with is so important,
right?
And that helps, not have any nerves because I'm cool if this works out, and if this doesn't work out, something else will.
Yeah, exactly. That is the only attitude. I use nerves. I actually use them because that amps me up.
Right.
If I'm nervous, that means I care. And if I care, then I'm going to do a good job. But I'm one of those people who can live at that level.
Right.
The more intense I am, I know how to calm myself, but I don't lose the adrenaline. Mm-hmm. So you also said, which you went through real casually, you are an intense study. You don't do anything. You don't even have conversations with me without having done your homework. And I love that about you because it forces me to make sure I know what I'm talking about. Like, don't just bullshit Dave. You're not going to get away with it. But you prepare and you put the time in. And even though the time isn't necessarily compensated right in the beginning, you know that that's the preparation that you have to go through.
Right.
And I've seen you do it on both sides of the fence. You do it technically and you do it musically. So as your career starts moving, what's challenging you more? The changes in technology, because you and I lived through mega changes. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could go back 100 years and it's not equivalent to the decade of changes we lived in. Mm-hmm. So keeping up with that was hard enough for me, and I'm on the front edge of that. But you have to learn it, and keep up with it. What was that all about?
Well, again, I was fascinated by all the technology that kept coming out. And every time something new would come out, I would be like, wow, now I can do this live. And now I can do that. But I need to learn how to do it. But I can do this now. And so I kept on finding better and more efficient ways to do what I wanted to accomplish. On the first Rainbow tour that I did, there was no MIDI. Synths didn't really have memories, except I had the OBXA, which was one of the first or earliest, the Oberheim earliest synths to have memory, and was also one of the first synths to be polyphonic. Right. So these were 2 like cutting edge things that I was able to do with that, which I had on the first tour. But there was no MIDI, and there was no everything else was, I had a clavinet, I had a Roland string synthesizer. And then on the first Rainbow tour, I had 2 mini Moogs because, there's no presets, there's no storage. So what I would do is I would use this one for the first song, and then this one for the second song. And I would start the show with each of them dialed up. And after I played the part on the first one, I'd be dialing up the first one for the sound to be used in the third or fourth song. And I kind of leapfrogged back and forth between that. So that was really intense because, you know, you have to be able to look at the face panel of the Mini Moog and know that it's going to sound right when I play it, because you don't get to test it and play a few notes and see if it's right. You have to actually memorize what they're supposed to be. But you know, that's just the way you had to do it. You know, nobody thought, oh, this is a drag. This is how, no, this is what you have to do. So you do it. And then, you know, so then the second tour was still no MIDI, but I added a memory Moog, which was another polyphonic synth with memories. And the Emulator 1 replaced one of my Mini Moogs. And this is the first time we had the 5 1/4 inch floppies, and you were able to load actually one sound, but it took like a minute and a half, or maybe even longer than that. It took like almost a whole song to load it. So I had to actually load it while I was playing with my other hand so that it would be ready for the next song, you know. Again, it was so cool that you could do that at all. Now it sounds funny talking about it, but then it was just amazing that you could even do it, period. So
no, what's amazing is you keep talking about, and then I reprogrammed the knobs on here and I moved that knob around, or then I loaded a disco, but you're on stage playing.
Right. Yeah.
It's
like
you
have to split your brain into two things. And it's kind of like, you know, but I love that because my mind is going a million miles an hour during a show. I'm thinking about what I got to play, but I'm also thinking about, you know, I'm kind of flying a plane with the keyboard rig, you know, and you have to think about that all the time, which also helps in a situation if something doesn't work. You know, I got to figure out how to get around it. So, you know, again, this is just it was very natural extension to me, but this is what keyboard players in those days did. If you wanted a multi-keyboard setup, you had to have that facility in your brain. And then MIDI came along later, and then it was a whole new world. And then it was all of a sudden, well, now I got memories, and now I can layer this synth with that synth, and now I can do all these things that I couldn't do before. So, and that kept on happening time and time again. But so, you know, to learn all that stuff all at once would have been, you know, an unclimbable mountain, but you know, as each new technology came out, I just kept expanding on my knowledge and talking to people and learning and reading Keyboard Magazine and reading Mix Magazine. And, you know, we didn't have YouTube in those days. There were no videos to watch. But, you know, you you learned by talking to people and going to NAMM shows and learning there. And, you know, I couldn't get enough of this stuff. So I you know, learning technology and you know, being a musician was my hobby as well as my profession. They were really intertwined. It's really all I did.
Yeah. And you hit something, if it worked. I mean, I built a 27-year-old business that fed me and my family very well for a long time because shit breaks.
Yeah.
The design part of Triple S was cool. And that honestly was not a really money maker because of the time that I had to devote to doing these techs. Right. And most musicians, right below that 1% are broke. It's a very interesting industry because my accountants didn't understand. Well, I don't understand. You have all these people. I said, yeah, but it's based on an industry that's broke. I said, there's only this level up here that has money, and 90% of the time, they're not going to pay anyway because they are who they are. Mm-hmm. So you have to be but things broke all the time. Well, I mean, stages, you guys would go on stage, not just you, everybody I'd get phone calls. You know, I'm in Chicago and my sequential 5, the Prophet 5 just went down and I don't have and I don't have another one. We're trying to rent, and all the rental companies became the support. I mean, the industry built around the tech. And you were right smack in the middle of all of that, turning buttons while you're still trying to play. I don't know where you got those other two hands from.
Well, some things you play don't require two hands, and you know, so you got one hand to twist the knobs for the song for one or two songs later. You know, because I got to be thinking down the road all the time. And I also, you know, in a certain song, it's like, well, in the second verse of this song, all I'm doing is playing simple chords. So that's in my mind, that's when I'll set up the sound. So but you have to, I don't know, you just figure out all these things and you find a way to make it work.
I'm playing simple chords in front of 20,000, or I'm playing simple chords in front of stadium. And also, you've got live musicians who are leading this.
Right.
So they may decide, Richie may decide, or somebody decide, I'm going to play it this way. I'm going to change this.
That's right. Yeah. Well, you can never go into your own world when you're performing. You always have to be following, if there's a band leader or whatever, you always have to keep one eye on him, and you got to listen constantly. You can't just sit there and go into your own world and just rock out and expect to get to the end with no issues, because, shit happens, and it's a live performance and things change. So you gotta really be paying attention and listening really well all the time. That's one of the biggest, most important things when you're playing, especially in a band, is not just that you're playing, but that you're listening, because that's the most important thing, because then you play things that make sense with what everybody else is playing. And if everybody else in the band is also listening, which is what a good band member will do, then the band stays cohesive, and it's not just a group of good musicians. It becomes a band, and that's a very different thing than a group of good musicians.
I'm just sitting here. My brain's going 100 miles an hour. I have so many questions I want to ask you, and I just don't have so much time to ask all the questions. So let's talk a lot about your experiences with Billy, because listen to me, Billy. Me and him are buds. I could call him Billy. Sometimes I call him Bill. So let's talk about that. Was getting in, because there's a litany, as I read through earlier, there's a litany of other gigs that you went through, all major names, all had to add to the fabric of who you are and experiences. But I want to focus on where you are now and where you've been since '93, because a lot happened in that. Let's talk about how you landed that particular gig, and then let's get into breaking out some of what your rig looks like and blah, 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 blah.
So, at that point in my career, this is 1993, and, I'd been been through Rainbow. I joined Rainbow in '81. So I already had a bunch of other tours under my belt, and my name was starting to get around a lot. And so, my name would pop up in circles when people were looking for a keyboard player, at that point, and Billy was looking for a new guy, and my name popped up. And so it was at that time, this is a very different thing. It was only 2 people invited, me and one other guy, and it was a closed audition. And, I was given a few songs to learn, and, I came in, and I not only learned the songs, but I programmed my whole keyboard rig as though I was going to perform them at Madison Square Garden that day of my audition.
Of course you did.
Well, and I rented a truck, and I brought all my gear, and I brought my keyboard tech, and I set up and the whole thing. And I was ready for those 4 songs that they gave me to do a concert that night. And I matched all the sounds so that I could play along with the record, and it sounded like the keyboards were too loud in the mix. I really, really did my homework. And so obviously, I got the gig. Here we are 30 years later, and it's worked out. But I found out some time later that the other guy, who was a good keyboard player, came in sort of knowing the changes to the songs and ready to jam on them. And so, there was really as I was told, there's no contest there. And so I got the gig, and 30 years later, let's say it's worked out.
What's it like being the keyboard player with a headliner who's a keyboard player?
Well, he's the piano man, and I play all the stuff that's not piano for the most part. I do organ, synthesizers. I do, I play horn lines, doubling the horns, and I add strings and sound effects and all kinds of different things. And sometimes he gets up to sing, and I play piano behind him. He's a great musician, and he's a great guy to work for. He really loves what I do and what I bring to the band and to the organization and everything. And, it's just, we've always just, clicked, and it's just really worked out. But who would have known when I signed up for just the River of Dreams tour that it would have lasted this long? You just you just don't know that these things will ever turn out that way. But it's really worked out fantastic. It's like, an extended family now. I've been doing it for so long.
Yeah, you guys have been together for like it's a true band.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been together for like a band would be, like as if you started together in high school and came all the way through.
Exactly. Yes.
And your technology, I mean, I guess it was pre-COVID, which is the milestone for everybody's life now. There's a before and there's an after. So I think it was the last time I was backstage with you and I saw your rig and I was like, holy crap, you have so much technology in those racks. It's amazing. And it's the same thing in your house. Your studio in your house is killer.
Well, thanks. That's where I'm at right now in here. But so let me tell you a little bit about the journey from because technology changed during these 30 years. So when I started with Billy in 93, in order to replicate his 30 years of albums, of which all of those times he used whatever was the latest, greatest synth on his records, and I had to replicate all that stuff. So in those days, I had a bunch of keyboard modules that were keyboards on stage, but also controllers, and I carried around tons of modules and I had all this gear because I needed this one to do this sound and that one to do that sound. And then I would replicate all that stuff. And, MIDI had been around for a number of years already. And I had sort of harnessed it, on several tours using it to be able to recall patches, although that was in its infancy compared to what you do now. But at that point in time, I was able to do that using the Studio 5 by Opcode, which was sort of the MIDI brain for the synths. And for the MIDI setup. So I programmed all that stuff and I did it, but it was a lot of gear that I was carrying around with me. And then little by little, I was able to, start getting, it got smaller and smaller because all of a sudden now they came out with digital mixers and now I could use a mixer this small. And then I could use, some of the synths would be able to do multiple things that were before they were dedicated to just one thing. So I was able to little by little get everything smaller as sampling technology got more intricate and more accurate, and doing it that way. And then eventually, when we had a little bit of a gap, a few years that he took off in 2010 till 2012. And during that time, MainStage was just coming about, and that was the beginning of wow, maybe there's going to be a new way to do this, that because MainStage would replace the mixer, it would replace all the modules, it could replace all of these things. So I worked up a few patches in that because we were getting ready for the 12-12-12 concert that we did, the big Hurricane Sandy relief. That was a big deal concert, and Billy hadn't played in several years, but we were going to do a few songs. So I thought, this will be a good opportunity for me to try out, this thing with MainStage. So I programmed up all the stuff, and I went and I did it, and then I went to go test it, and it couldn't. It choked. The system choked. It couldn't keep up with my playing, and if I played a big chord, it would just go. It couldn't stream fast enough, and nothing worked. So for that show, I ended up just using a Kurzweil. But right around that time, Thunderbolt came out and solid state drives came out. And that changed everything. And then all of a sudden, this programming that I had done, my little programming experiment project of 5 or 6 songs, all of a sudden, now it worked. Just because of that. Because now it could stream fast enough. And now I could play big chords and it could keep on. I was like, now I can do this. And then MainStage came out with the, version 2 and a version 3, and it kept on getting more and more powerful. So I took, a lot of time and I converted my whole old system with all these modules that I've been taking around and little by little converted it until it was all running inside of MainStage. And that's the system that I've been using now on the road with Billy since 2014. And it's just really remarkable. Everything that I do lives in software. And now, because it's so small, I not only have my whole keyboard rig living in software, but I have 2 keyboard rigs because I have real-time redundancy because I'm running 2 completely identical MainStage systems in real time because you're still running a computer and it can get squirrely and it can crash. And even though you troubleshoot it and, till you're blue in the face, you try to think of everything. something can still happen, but I can hit a button and I don't miss a beat. I just continue using my B rig while the A rig gets restarted. And then I can switch back. So I have real-time redundancy. So in this one rack, I have 2 complete keyboard systems, which used to take like a truck to carry one rig, and now I have real-time redundancy with this. So, it really, when I was putting that together, it was just a question of really thinking through, okay, I've done all these tours and have all these different keyboard rigs that have evolved. But if I were to rethink this now, what would I want to do? Well, one time on this tour, this happened. Okay, I can compensate for that ever happening again. And now another time this happened, and another time that happened. And I set up all of these redundancies and safety nets in case this would happen, in case that would happen, and whatever. And then I designed my keyboard rig that way, and it's been working now. It's 24. So coming up on 10 years that I'm using this new system, and it's worked out really great. Yeah,
you're amazing. I mean, if there's a chance that somebody has no idea who you are, they're listening to this going, "Oh, so he's the engineer on the tour." So no, his musical chops are superior to what he just rattled off on a tech thing. Tech thing is what he assumes is necessity. I have to know this. Where most other artists would just go, hire this person, make this efficient for me, figure out a way that never happens again.
Right.
Not you.
Well, I've been fortunate to also do that for other artists. I designed, 2 keyboard systems for Bruce Springsteen's keyboard players. I've done this for a lot of different artists, and it came out of the necessity of wanting this for myself and wanting to master all these technologies and figuring out a better way to do what I do. But then it was like, well, wait a minute, I could also help you. I can help you. I can do this, and I love doing the technical side of it. And they were like, "Are you sure you're okay not to be on stage?" It's like, I am so okay. I get plenty of that. I love being behind the scenes and solving this puzzle of, okay, I know what it's like to be on stage playing your keyboards. I know what you need to do, and I know what's going through your mind as a player. I can set up a keyboard system for you that's going to work the way you want it to work. And it's like just putting together a puzzle. And I love doing that. I really, really enjoy it.
Right. Dude, we're way over. This is, that's just because you're nuts. And I can talk to you like I'm talking to 5 other people, masters in 5 other areas, which is so cool. Dave, cool. Thank you. I'm going to say it, but I got to get you back.
Anytime. It's always a pleasure talking with you.
I appreciate it. And we do get along. We're both outliers, but somehow we're in the same universe together. So
absolutely. Yeah.
All right, brother. Appreciate you.
Okay, cool.
Ciao.
Take care, Joe.